All right, we're just going to run over the results of the preconditioning test. It ended up being a bit of a preconditioning blog on, I've got 5 trips here and I recorded the data on those 5 trips. Now, these were cold mornings. It's taken me a long time to get this done because I had to wait for some good weather, and we've had some pretty bad weather here in Sydney lately. So I needed some days where I had a couple of attempts at this. I needed some days where there wasn't going to be as much, similar amounts of traffic and similar weather, nice clear mornings, no rain, no wind. So it took a while to string 5 of those days together, and I wanted them to be reasonably cold. So I think I've got a good spread of results here. This is my first time doing a screen capture and then editing that in, so bear with me here if it's not the best. But basically, if you want to look at the data, I'll try and make the Excel spreadsheet available, maybe copy it across to a Google sheet and then share that. But there's not a lot of data here. You can probably just pause the YouTube video and just do a screenshot of the data. But anyway, we'll start going through the data because I think here it makes the point. As I did these videos, I thought this was going to be a really straightforward thing, doing a video on preconditioning. I thought I'll just precondition one morning and then not precondition the next morning and show you the cost differences, the efficiency differences. But once I started getting into it, I realized that probably is not enough. So what I did was I did 5 tests. 2 of those were not preconditioning, and 3 of those were preconditioning. So then we did preconditioning with the car plugged in, and then preconditioning with the car not plugged in, and basically, yeah, just looked at the results there and looked at the cost differences. So I tried to put a cost on preconditioning. Now there's a lot of variables there. It's not a super scientific test that I've done here in a controlled environment, but I think what we've seen here, there's enough difference in the figures for you to realize and make your own judgment whether you want to precondition or not. But it really comes down to, at the start of this experiment / blog, my hypothesis was preconditioning was definitely going to use more energy and be more expensive. But I knew it wasn't going to come down to cost. And you can take a look at for yourself. The difference in cost, I don't think, is enough. Now, my hypothesis at the start was it's not a cost thing. Cost shouldn't be what decides. It should be a comfort thing and a consistent drive feel. So let's have a look at the spreadsheet and we'll go from there. So looking down at the spreadsheet now, you can see the first column here I have preconditioned, whether I preconditioned or not. So you can see there 2 mornings I did, 3 mornings I didn't. Energy from the battery used for preconditioning. Now, even when you're plugged in, some energy does get taken from the battery depending on what outlet you're plugged into. So I only have a 240 volt 10 amp outlet here in my garage. I don't have any high powered charging going on here at home. I don't really need it, but yeah, that's all I've got to work from. So that's obviously not enough to supply the energy that's consumed during a precondition. So even just the rear motor coming on as a battery heater is 2.5 kilowatts. So that's more than what my socket can supply on its own, let alone then running the heat pump to assist with that. So it goes up above and beyond what a 10 amp socket will supply. So we're seeing some energy used from the battery. We here have energy used from the wall socket. So you can see here I did a precondition. I did one precondition where I was plugged into the wall. So I think that illustrated that But these tests were all done outside in ambient temperatures. So I've got the total energy used for preconditioning, and that's adding up the energy. That's just a sum of these two columns. So we've got the total energy used, and we've put a cost to that. So that is the total energy used with a times by 21 cents per kilowatt hour is what I pay in for my electricity at home that comes off coming off the grid. So I've put a cost there to that, and I've done the ambient temp at preconditioning, the average ambient temperature for the trip during the drive. I've done battery state of charge at the beginning of the trip, battery temp at the start of the trip, battery temp at the end of the trip, so you can see how much the battery heated up over that approximately half an hour trip. Regen limit at the start of the trip, so the regen limit at the start of the trip decides how consistent the drive is. Regen limit at the end of the trip, so we got to see how much that increased by the time when the battery had warmed up a bit. Average consumption for the trip. So this is the important thing. I think I wanted to look at the consumption, the efficiency of the car over that trip, preconditioned or not, and then in different ambient temperatures. Energy used for the trip, cost of just the trip itself, obviously multiplied by the cost of my electricity at home. Now this is factoring in if you're paying. If you've got solar, obviously what your cost is there for solar would be the cost of you not pumping that energy back onto the grid, the excess energy. It's going into the battery of your car instead of you getting paid a tariff. Now here in Australia, the tariff you get paid for the energy going back on the grid is pretty small anyway. I think average maybe 10 cents per kilowatt hour I think would be good. So really the cost isn't zero for solar, but as an ongoing expense, you could save a lot of money filling up your battery off the excess solar produced at home or work. Total energy used for the whole trip, so for the pre-con and the trip. So we've got a total there, and then we've got a total cost of that. So I will just briefly go over each trip. You can look at the data for yourself, but I'll give a summary. So the first trip, I hadn't preconditioned and was just sitting out in 9.5 degrees, and basically the battery was at battery temp at starter trip was 14. Didn't get as cold as I wanted it to, so that's why I ended up doing another one of those where the battery was down at 10 degrees at the start of the trip. I thought to be fair, I'd get the battery a little bit colder, and that's about as cold as it gets here in Sydney, so this is the coldest I can do. The battery temp at the end of the trip, you'll see it didn't heat up that much at all. Regen limit at the start of the trip, 25.5. That's really that's not it's not really a nice drive. You're really having to use the brake pedal a lot, and that's what I found there. So that was just a higher state of charge, so 82%, and I didn't realize even at 82% you're going to get some regen limiting at that with a cold battery. It's going to be even worse. So I found out that your state of charge really it really affects that. So a higher state of charge with a cold battery, it's going to be even worse for regen limit. And you can see that there, the regen limit for that with the battery at 82% and the battery at 14 degrees was 25.5. But if we come down here when the battery was 10 degrees, you can see my state of charge being at 51, ambient temperature being colder as well. I've got 35.9 kilowatts as a regen limit. So having a lower state of charge, this was something I really learnt. It doesn't need to limit it as hard, because even though it's an LFP battery, when the battery's at a lower temperature, if it's at a lower state of charge, then that reduces the damage caused from the cold. So having that lower state of charge, the battery is at a less stressed state. It doesn't have as much charge in it. Even when it's cold, you can still regen, give a good regen limit. But going downhill, down a prolonged downhill slope, that is going to drop dramatically compared to a warm battery here at 20 degrees. That 39.8 doesn't, on a long descent, doesn't decrease as quickly as that. So that 35.9 dropped down to 10 kilowatts very fast going down a prolonged downhill. So what my prediction for this was, basically, if we had reduced regen, that when I got to work, because this trip had a lot of downhill, that would be the biggest factor. So 25.5 kilowatt regen, I thought, wow, okay, that's not going to regen as much. That's really going to affect the efficiency. But it didn't really have as much of an effect as I thought. The biggest factor in the efficiency, that does have an effect on the efficiency, but you can see here that I did precondition for this one. I didn't precondition here. Lower state of charge. I think it's more the HVAC working hard with the lower ambient temperature. So I think really it's your HVAC drawing a lot more power to keep the cabin at a good temperature and to try and heat the battery up. And when you combine those, you can see here, even though I had good regen, my battery was cold and I had a cold ambient temperature, and that affected the efficiency. You can see here 139 watt hours per kilometer. That was the least efficient trip. So even though I had good regen, it wasn't as efficient as the unpreconditioned trip with 25.5. So I thought this one with 25.5 would be the least efficient, but it didn't rely on that regen. So that was something that really stood out. So it is the cold battery and the cold ambient temperature that team up and give you that poor efficiency. So we can see that that was the worst one. Now, I'm not going to, it'll drag on too long if I go through each one of these trips, because I've actually done a video of each one of those trips and been through that with you, but I just want to highlight some of the things that this table highlights. So I think there you can see the that was as consistent as I could get the temperatures. You can see that the most efficient trip was one where I preconditioned, but you can see here I preconditioned not plugged into the wall. So that one there was the most efficient, but the ambient temperature was slightly higher, and the ambient temperature for the trip was slightly higher. So I think just preconditioning in general is going to give you a more efficient drive. So this one here was a little bit of an exception. You can see at the end I did precondition, and I got 132 watt hours per kilometer, but I can go back here and explain that. So the regen wasn't too bad, 35.3. The battery temp at the start of the trip was 19.5, so yeah, very similar to some of these other more efficient trips, but the ambient temperature was low. So that was a reasonably cold morning. That was the coldest average ambient temperature for the trip, and that explains why that one there was just as inefficient as that trip there. But even the worst trip here, 139 watt hours per kilometer, is super efficient compared to a lot of other electric vehicles. So the Model 3 is such an efficient car. This is what I wanted to show you, that preconditioning it's something that I do, and since I've discovered all this with this test, my perception is I realized I don't need to be plugged into precondition all the time. I don't need to keep my state of charge high up. I now don't charge every day. So I was charging every day, topping it up to 100% at work. I now don't do that every day because I know if I'm down at lower states of charge, the car is much more consistent to drive in cold weather. And my drive routine, my drive habits allow me to do that. They allow me to run the battery down. You know, I use about 10% per day on a return trip to work on average. Some days up to 15%. It just depends on the weather and things too. So I think here these numbers are all very close. You can read this sheet and take a look for yourself, but efficiency wise, the most efficient trip, I've explained that one. So the one where I preconditioned from the wall wasn't the most efficient because that day was a little bit colder. So I think I've got a good spread here to show you that ambient temperature is a big thing. The battery temperature is the next most important thing. And then regen wasn't as important as I thought, wasn't as critical to the efficiency of the car. So even on this trip where there was a lot of downhill, so if we go back to you can see here the elevation gain for all tests was 138 meters and the loss was minus 268 meters. So you can see with the overall figure being minus 130.6 meters. So that's a lot of descent there. So I thought regen was just going to be such a big factor, and it wasn't. So that was a surprise in this one. You can see the cost of the trips here. So we have the most expensive one was 70 cents and the cheapest one was 55 cents. So guys, yeah, when you break it down into an actual cost for a short commute like this for 30 minutes, 35 minutes, that's probably, in a big city, that's probably everyone's average commute that drives. So I don't really see a need here. And then over a longer trip, a lot of these temperatures are going to balance out. So it's really going to come down to the ambient temperature on a longer trip. Colder ambient temperature on a longer trip is going to mean higher consumption due to the HVAC. And then just due to the colder air. The colder air is dense and much harder for the car to push out of the way. So it affects the aerodynamic efficiency on a longer trip at higher speeds. So you're going to see a few more factors come in. This is purely just a daily commute. I wanted to show you the difference but with preconditioning or not. Over a longer trip, if you precondition or not, you will use more energy initially, but then I think over, say, a 500 kilometer trip, I think that efficiency figure is going to balance out a bit. It's not going to take long for the car to warm up. And if you were to do 2 tests, preconditioned or not, over a long drive, I think the figures are going to be very similar. Not that they're massively different here. So you can see here then total cost of the trips. We're not seeing a massive difference there. This one here, where I preconditioned not plugged into the wall, that's where it actually, because of the colder morning, used a lot more power to precondition the car. So almost 3 kilowatt hours. So that just shows you, yeah, preconditioning on those super cold mornings. It's roughly 1%, I think, is half a kilowatt hour. So we're looking at, you know, what are we looking at there? You know, 1.5% off your battery, 2%. Yeah, I think on average, you could say 2% off your car to precondition in these temperatures, 2% off the charge state. So, yeah, guys, have a look at these figures. I was pretty surprised. My overall conclusion, and to sort of finish this off, is that preconditioning, do it for comfort, not to save yourself money, you know, not to, the cost isn't a deciding factor. It's purely a consistent drive feel that I would be preconditioning the car for. And then as an added bonus, I guess over the life of the car, as I've said in the thing, in the videos, I don't know whether over the life of the car, whether preconditioning and running the car at, you know, a more stabilized temperature is going to increase the life of the battery, reduce degradation. I can't possibly test that, but for these costs, guys, I'd just precondition the car. I wouldn't worry. Precondition the car, plugged in if you can. Makes the car much nicer to drive. You've got one pedal driving every time you drive, and that's pretty important to me. I mean, we love how these electric cars drive. Why not drive it at its highest performance? So guys, I'll try and leave that spreadsheet somewhere there for you to take a look at. If not, as I said before, pause the video and do a screenshot of it. But we'll come back up to the camera now, leave the spreadsheet. Guys, hopefully this, I know this turned into more of a blog more than an accurate scientific test, but I wanted to put this here because I know some of you guys are a bit worried about the LFP battery. I still, after owning this car for a year now, I don't mind. The LFP battery I don't think has held me back. It charges fast enough. And yeah, it's pretty efficient. It's nice to drive. And I think overall, you know, when this car is older, the LFP battery is going to be good for resale because it won't have as much degradation as, you know, a standard lithium ion battery, a nickel cobalt battery. So I think overall, I'm still positive about the LFP battery. I think it's great. I do have another test that I have done with supercharging for 2 weeks only to look at cell imbalance and see if that causes a cell imbalance with the LFP battery. And then I had a bit of a look at my degradation after 1 year with the battery. So that'll be my next video coming up, and take a look at that. So hopefully you guys got something out of this, learned something out of this. Hopefully I've put your mind at ease with a few things and you can decide whether you want to precondition or not. I'm preconditioning every day still, so it hasn't stopped me during winter. Maybe summer, I'm realizing I'm not going to need to precondition unless the car is nice and hot and I want to cool it down. So guys, I'm going to leave it there. Thanks again for watching. This has been a much longer series than I thought. So this video sort of evolved. I probably published some of those videos before I should have, because I had in my mind that the other videos were just going to be pretty easy. It didn't work out that way. So I really appreciate you watching these longer videos. There's a lot of information in there for you, and it's information that I wish I had at the beginning when I bought an electric vehicle, and especially for a Tesla with the LFP battery. I went into that blind and not knowing much about the battery, so I wanted to make sure that you guys don't have to do that. And that's the purpose of doing these videos and putting this information out there, so that you've got a resource to come to for information on this. So once again, guys, put some questions in the comments. I'm interested if anyone else has done this sort of data and got something that contradicts this, because I'm happy to do some more tests if you've got any more questions. So all right guys, I'll end it there. Have a great day, evening, morning, whatever time zone it is when you're watching this, and I'll catch you later. Thanks.